Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Isabel Thornton with me from Restoration Housing. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah. So my background as a student, I studied architectural history in college. And I have always loved architectural history since I was a child, as far as I can remember. My parents both love history, art history. My grandfather was a professor of history. And so that just sort of was in my DNA, I think. And I knew I didn't want to be an architect, but I just, found myself in the architecture school at the University of Virginia and studying architectural history. One of my favorite classes was this course called Cities in History. Who was taught by my thesis advisor, Dell Upton, who I'm still a really big fan of. And it was the history of different cities going back all these different layers of the cities from their first inception to, maybe like Constantinople, for example, Istanbul, and all the different phases of religion and building and just cultural history that's woven into cities. And that really resonated with me. And I think that's really informed a lot of what I do now, which is preservation, but it's very focused on the city. And Roanoke is the city that I live in and grew up in. And there's something about preservation on a city and kind of neighborhood scale that really fascinated me at an early age.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really interesting course. That sounds like something I would have enjoyed. Yeah,
it was fascinating. Yeah, he started that I think class on Constantinople playing the "They Might Be Giants" song, and he's a really good professor. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's just something about architectural history that's not just specific to a building, but kind of how it connects to broader social issues within a city.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very, very interesting. And
then I went on to graduate school to study preservation, kind of just to further this interest in historic preservation and architectural history, but not really sure what I was going to do with that degree. I just knew I loved this subject matter. And I went to the University of Southern California, and their preservation program was in their architecture school. Some of them are in the planning schools. It's very interesting kind of how different universities take different approaches to preservation. But I ended up taking a lot of classes at the School of Public Policy and Urban Planning and found myself really attracted to the sustainable cities movement. That looked a lot like what we call new urbanists in architecture and what we call smart growth and urban planning. And it's just a lot of the sort of confluence of preservation and affordable housing where, in both parts of these movements. And I just found myself really attracted to both preservation and affordable housing intellectually and trying to marry the two concepts, but not really knowing how.
Yeah, I I think that there is such a large overlap between preservation and sustainable building and green building and all of those concepts, but the preservationists and the green building people don't talk to each other.
They really don't enough, or they kind of tried to, but then it fails and they just give up or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're speaking, they're all, they have the same goals, but they're speaking different languages. And I don't know if they know how to bridge that, but yeah, I do, oops. I bumped my cord that holds my microphone in. So if I went away for a second, that was me. But I do think that those goals are, there's a lot of overlap that needs to be worked on, because it is very sustainable to reuse buildings rather than try to build new buildings that are greener.
Of course. Yeah. And I think there's just the smart growthers are looking for ways to kind of promote urban planning policies that are more green, kind of on neighborhood and community levels. And they are, urban planners by trade, so they don't really think from a design standpoint, or a preservation standpoint, how you can use these existing buildings in your communities and how green that is, just to not have to either tear down or build new or build out on a greenfield site, but to use your existing housing stock. And it's not, it's the greenest thing you could do. You've got all this embedded energy that you're preserving. And I think a lot of people get caught up in sort of the ways that historic buildings can be costly to maintain or hard to retrofit into being more environmentally conscious or environmentally sustainable. But really, I think, yes, there are those costs, but once you get past that, they can be just like so much of a energy save in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was on a advisory committee for a 106 review, and I brought up reusing. Most of the building was wrapped. You couldn't tell what was underneath it, but I brought up that you could see the original windows were up in the second floor. But it was a HUD project. They freaked out immediately. They were like, those windows have lead paint on them. And, and I'm like, you can get around that. Like, there were things that you can do, but I'm like, and it was just like, we were all working towards the same goals, but we weren't looking at it exactly the same. But I know, like, in a HUD project, lead paint is a huge issue. So, so I just was, well,
it's a huge issue if you keep them or you take them out. Either way,
you're making dust. Yeah.
So it's like, well, okay, we have to deal with this one way or another.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I was surprised, because I'm used to dealing with preservationists that are used to dealing with, fixing windows. So like, they know how to deal with this. I wasn't expecting that reaction.
Yeah. Because we have sort of a dual mission of both preservation and affordable housing, we often deal a lot with HUD. We have funding that comes through HUD and the city of Roanoke or the state, and all these sort of more, government funding sources require us to be very compliant on one end, and then we have to be really compliant on the preservation end, because we're getting historic tax credits. So we have quite a bit of compliance that we're used to on this point. But even with all of that, it's so worth it, in my mind, I think, given the outcome of what you can do with those sources.
Yeah, I agree. So we've kind of talked about it, but what really interests you in preservation?
Sure. I think it's just sort of a true love of older buildings. I don't know that it's anything more complicated than that. It's really, I love, like I said, a historic architecture, older homes. I think that older homes are usually built in a really, a much more, I guess, a kind of substantial construction that you don't really see anymore since World War II.
Right.
More substantive materials, forms of construction. There's just like there's one property we did that we restored that had actual tree trunks for floor joists that were like full, not even not even shaved down or anything, just like real trees. And
It had the bark on them. Yeah.
the bark on them and 200 years old and still going strong. And then you'll see a house like that. And then you'll see an addition that might have been built in, say, like the 1930s or 40s falling down.
Right.
And so it's just, I think these sort of, it's maybe a bit of nostalgia for the way that things used to be built, a longing for that a little bit more in what we build today. I get a little depressed just driving around and seeing sprawl and big box construction and the way that we just keep building out further and more cheaply. And so it started maybe with that, but then really wanting to bring a practicality to, older homes that are vacant in Roanoke, which, we're kind of an old railroad city in Virginia, not that old compared to other parts of Virginia, but we have a lot of old housing stock right outside of our downtown core that has been, either suffering for several decades of mismanagement, blight, vacancy, you name it. And so we kind of look for those houses to restore them because they're a great resource, I think, reflecting Roanoke's history and Roanoke's past. And I'm attracted to, an opportunity to restore them, but I really want to do it in a practical way. Like, what's the best use for this?
Right.
What really serves the community? How do we activate this space? We're not just preserving it to preserve it. So we kind of think of it as like a lowercase preservation. It's got to have a purpose. We're reusing it, we're restoring it, but we're not just preserving it for the sake of history alone.
Right. Yeah, I often will say to people, especially people who are like really purists that want like buildings to be, like museum quality. I'm like, if a building's not useful, it won't be preserved. So buildings need to be useful.
Right. And even from a business standpoint, we're a nonprofit, but our buildings can't, we have to be able to afford the construction and we have to be able to afford the maintenance. So the buildings have to be, kind of functional businesses in a way.
Right.
And so you can't have a property that has such extreme maintenance costs because of its historic nature that it's not viable to, to stay sustainable for our organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. So tell me about restoration housing.
Sure. So like I said, I studied out in California and I was interested in these kind of dual preservation and affordable housing ideas. And I was writing my thesis and studied a nonprofit in Pasadena called Heritage Housing Partners. I think that's right, Heritage Housing. And they their focus was on preservation and affordable housing in Pasadena in a way that I was really inspired by. They did a mix of rental and homeownership opportunities that kind of have a lot of different ways of funding their projects that probably have different outcomes of what they offer. Some multi-unit, some single family bungalows, really cute little historic bungalows and bungalow courts. And I was writing my thesis on bungalow courts in Pasadena. I was really fascinated by the concept of sort of small scale but dense affordable housing and using historic resources to accommodate that. And so that's where the idea started. And then I got a lot of experience working in affordable housing for several large nonprofits for several years before I started restoration housing in Roanoke. Like I said, seeing this need of these vacant homes in Roanoke and the first rung suburbs right outside of our downtown, wanting to do something about that, but not really sure what. And so it really started with, okay, I'm going to try to buy one using fundraising. I created a nonprofit. We fundraised, purchased a property, and then just funded that property through historic tax credits, the first go round. But we have debt on that house. So then future projects, I started to, branch out and grow as a nonprofit and realized grants that we could get. So we now get grants both from small local foundations, banks, but we also get large grants, like I said, from the city, through HUD, through the state. State Housing Trust Fund is a great resource. And we combine all these grants and the tax credits, and we usually fully subsidize our costs so that the projects are debt free. And so that really came from inspiration of other groups.
Yes.
I listened to the podcast you did a few, maybe weeks ago or a month or two ago with Bluebird.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of a similar dual mission. And really just like she said, we're trying to solve two problems, and that's sort of what we're doing too. We were seeing vacancy of historic buildings, and then we were seeing both a strong need for more affordable housing, but really a strong need for quality affordable housing.
Right.
There's a great deal of existing affordable housing in Roanoke that is very substandard. People living in a lot of historic homes in these first-rung suburbs that are not well maintained.
Right.
By slumlords, for lack of a better term. They're really just that's what a lot of affordable housing looks like in Roanoke. And so we were trying to offer an alternative to restore these homes and have a really high quality experience for our tenants that we felt, gave them dignity versus, living in a slum.
Yeah. And especially if you're using the historic tax credits, I mean, there's a level that you have to meet to be able to qualify for those.
Absolutely. It's sort of just like this embedded high quality that you have to have. You have to have original hardwood flooring. We are putting all new plumbing, electrical, and mechanical systems in. We are putting in custom cabinetry and new appliances and ceramic tile flooring. And I'm a big believer in large closets and in-unit washers and dryers and things like that. So we really want to make it a nice, beautiful space. Yeah.
And then are you like maintaining ownership of the properties and just renting them out?
Yes.
Okay.
So stewardship, kind of like what she was saying with Bluebird, is really important to us. I think that it's really important to help reduce the stigma of affordable housing for people to see that good landlords are what really matters.
Right.
I think when we first started, people were nervous about rental housing. They were nervous about light density, like more than one unit in an older home. And they were nervous about the term affordable housing. And all three of those things are sort of triggering for some people.
Right.
But we are trying to say the reason they're triggering are because of bad landlords. And if you have a good steward of the property, then you will see a home, I think, reflect very similarly to a single family homeowner right next door. And I still believe that. When our first project got a lot of backlash, and now if you drive by, it looks just like every other single family home on the block, and has, we invested quite a bit into it, and it's only added property values for its neighbors. It's not detracting in any way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I probably mentioned it during the Bluebird discussion, but there's a big push for affordable housing here in Lancaster City, and I sit on the historic review board, and the developers are being pretty smart where they're picking empty lots or non-historic properties to build these small scale apartment complexes on, or buildings. I guess they're just buildings. It's not an entire complex, but the amount of uproar in the neighborhood that, they're going to put affordable housing in our neighborhood. And I'm like, but it's the neighborhood did the same thing when there was a Gothic style house that had been a fraternity house, that a nonprofit that houses mothers and young children bought the fraternity house and was gonna put their housing there, and the neighborhood threw a fit there then too. And I'm like, I would definitely rather have a house with mothers with small children than a fraternity house in my neighborhood any day of the week.
because of density, right? I mean, the spirit of density. It's amazing. I think it really goes back to just sort of, I think, two things. One, I think historically affordable housing, the way that it was built from the 80s on, or maybe the 70s on, was very, very dense, new construction, and still is often. the typical model for affordable housing developers now is like 40 units or more. And that's how they make the deals work. It's very hard to make them work otherwise.
Yeah.
And they use low income housing tax credits. And in order to be competitive to receive those, you have to have a pretty dense, big project. So then you have, density of poverty and a kind of a big new, like you were saying, a rectangular building that stands out and doesn't really integrate subtly into the neighborhood. But if you have something that does look just like every other house on the block, I think it can help reduce that stigma.
Mhm.
And then, I think just density in general, sort of the way that our culture has and our society has slowly over decades prioritized single family home ownership, and single family homes is the only way to for a neighborhood really to thrive and for people to attain wealth and to have high property values. It sort of is a feedback loop that has discarded, I think, a lot of the social benefits of slightly more dense neighborhoods.
Yeah, I agree, and I know that because that is the move in planning, is to move towards more density. And I've heard on NPR a lot of people being very upset, especially in the West, where it's definitely less dense than the East Coast. People being upset about not having single family houses, and I was born in Colorado, and my dad's family's from Oregon. So yeah, I see that there's just a lot of little, individual houses on lots, but it makes sense to make it more dense. It does. Yeah.
I think to speak to your question about challenges, that was sort of what I was going to get
into.
Yeah. Idea of the missing middle housing is what planners call it. This housing that really historically existed. I think if you look at the turn of the century, and we look at this, I think it's fascinating in the Roanoke history records. A lot of the neighborhoods and houses that we are focused on did exist this way 100 years ago, 120 years ago. The houses would have had one family and then maybe a tenant living with them,
right,
or two tenants. Or during the Great Depression, the original family was there and they had 5 tenants.
right.
And they had a flexibility of use that allowed the houses to fluctuate during different economic downturns and productivity. And it stopped when we kind of got into a form of zoning that restricted use very specifically.
Right.
And that then created these very narrow neighborhood delineations. And you have an RM1 neighborhood and an RM2 neighborhood, and they look very, very different. And RM2 allows for flexibility in our city and in multiple units, and an RM1 is all single family. And
right.
But 100 years ago, you would have had all of that kind of mixed together.
Right. And there was multi-generational housing where,
right.
After it's kind of with the change in building after World War II, then we went to, just your nuclear family and not, not that extended family too.
And I think so planners are seeing now the benefit of this, what we had before, which allows for, like a flat, grandmother flat, as they say, over the garage, or,
right.
It gets murky and, kind of problematic in some ways, because a lot of people are trying to change this on local land use for Airbnb use, which is not really the same thing. And it can be, it's like you're getting good code changes out of it, but you're not getting the same benefit of what we're talking about.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's also still a source of revenue. Airbnb is for people. I'm a big believer that if the homeowner is there and it's a source of revenue, then it's kind of similar. But when they're an absent homeowner, it doesn't have the same benefit.
Yeah, I agree. And you're taking housing stock away from people that live and work there.
Right. And so, we in Roanoke, we don't really have that we have a lot of Airbnbs, but we don't have that really strong shift that I think more advanced markets do, like, bigger cities with really competitive housing markets. So I can't speak to our experience being reflective of what other cities are dealing with, but all that being said is that that sort of flexibility in older neighborhoods, they're walkable, they're reflective of the, the region's history. They
Right.
have a lot of great amenities, and they just kind of create these thriving neighborhoods that I love and would love to see more of, and a lot of planners would love to see more of. But I think in order to see more of that, you really do have to have, I think, either planners that can change the code without getting a lot of NIMBY backlash, which is
Right.
very difficult, or you have to just kind of shift, I think, the stigma of rental, affordable, and density.
Mhm.
And there is a slow shift happening, but it's not there yet, I
Right.
think. So
No,
that's one of the
I
challenges we
agree.
deal with, I would say. I'm a big proponent of it, but it's not as readily, available to see in our community as we would like.
Yeah. Yeah. So what trends or challenges do you see in preservation?
I mean, I think, like I just said, a lot of um, the small scale preservation that we do is very different from your typical. So my husband and I met because he's also a developer. He develops market rate preservation projects in our downtown Roanoke, and so the work that he does, he might take an old warehouse and turn it into 25 units, is very, very different from one house that we do. And, one of the big challenges that we deal with, I think, really since the tax law changed, and I don't know if you've heard this in your other podcasters that you've talked to, but since the federal tax law changed, syndicating federal credits has become a lot harder for small scale developers. It used to be, because we're a nonprofit, we have to sell our federal
Right.
and state
Yeah.
tax credits. And so we are looking for people that want to buy, not a large number of credits. So it's a little bit harder to market them. And the federal credits now have to be, used over a course of 5 years. And that changed in the tax law of, I believe it was 2000. It went into effect 2018, I think. Is that
Mhm.
right?
I think that is right.
So any property we did before that, it was a lot easier to sell those. And now it's just trickier. It means that, we just put a lot more time and energy into finding investors, and then we don't get as good of a price per dollar on the credit. So
Right.
I'm a big advocate for, the small scale preservation, but it comes with, I think, a lot of difficulties from an economic side of, there's a
Right.
reason a lot of people don't do these deals,
Yeah.
because there's not a lot of money back, but that's why we're a nonprofit. So,
Right.
we're not looking for a return on our investment.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find though that over time that it does eventually balance out with the rental income or?
Yeah, I think because we have a fundraiser every year. We have donors locally that give to us. Our properties do pay us a small management fee each month, and we do get lots of grants. So cobbling all those resources together, we're able to pay salaries to 3 employees, and then we have a lot of contract work as well that we
Right.
do. So it does work out. We're definitely profitable as a nonprofit, but it is as far as development goes, it's very different from what other developers see
Right.
when they do those kinds of projects. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know, yeah, and you were talking about the bigger needing more units because they need the units to get what they need out of it.
Right.
Yeah. So, is there anything that, as we were talking, that you wanted to share that maybe I didn't ask you about?
Let's see. I think, I just, kind of going back to some of the challenges on specific projects. I was going to mention that probably every project has its own unique challenges, because we don't really do any one project the same way over and over. So because we're community based, we find a house first, and then we decide, based off the level of damage and based off the size and the floor plan, then we kind of go from there. We say, are we going to do this or not? And then we create the unit matrix, how that's going to work, what the funding needs to be to cover the construction, and then what the income needs to be operationally. But each project presents its own challenges because we find the house first. We don't just say, this is our model,
Right.
and let that come to us. I think that's the opposite of what most affordable housing developers do, where most affordable housing developers, like I was saying, use LIHTC, low income housing tax credits. They're looking for a deal based off of what will give them the credits.
Right.
So they'll just search for a piece of land or building until it meets that criteria. And we're the exact opposite, where we already found our project, and then we're going to find the funding model and the kind of what demographics and what unit matrix and everything works after that. So with each project, you might have a challenge with funding, or you might have an issue like a giant hole in the roof that's been there for 6 years and all the floor damage related to that, structural damage. We might have NIMBYism, backlash, or zoning issues. And so each project is very different and complicated, but I think that they've never been discouraging to a point where it isn't fun to do this work. It's always really fun. I think it's fun to be presented with a challenge and have to think creatively about how to fix it. There's some houses that, structural engineers said, you have to tear this down the first time we saw it. And then you just keep going until you find a structural engineer that says no.
Well, when you were talking about the logs, that was the first thought I had, trying to get an engineer to sign off on that, because it doesn't fit into their computer model.
Right. It's like, you keep going, because it's almost like you can, I don't want to get too, I'm going to like jinx myself and have a project that doesn't work, but there are ways to make almost any preservation project work with the right, I think, fortitude and creativity.
I agree. And having people that know what they're looking at, because oftentimes when you get the people who say it won't work, they've never done it before. And so they just assume that it won't work.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we've found some people locally that are really helpful in looking at these projects creatively also, and like coming in and saying, this is like a puzzle and we're going to put it together this way. And a contractor that loves to do the really, really tricky puzzling projects is key.
Yes.
But, I think that what we have as a tool that's really helpful is being a nonprofit that can get affordable housing funding and can get historic tax credit funding, because some of these projects need so much work.
Right.
That if you just use the tax credit funding, it wouldn't be enough.
Right.
And if you just use the affordable housing funding, it wouldn't be enough. So you really need both resources available to offset the costs. And there are great resources in the affordable housing world right now for nonprofits. So we've benefited from, I think, being able to pull from both sides of these two different worlds to make the funding work.
Yeah, that's what I think is exciting about the work that you're doing is that you're definitely using this or tax credits, you're restoring to what the standards would be, but then you're also, creating affordable housing. And I think that is it, solving two problems. And I think that's a great mission. How can our listeners support your work?
Sure. Well, we, like I said, are a nonprofit, so they can support us through donations if they feel so inclined. They can just follow us on social media too and stay connected to what we're doing. So you can find us on Facebook at Restoration Housing, Instagram, LinkedIn. Our website is restorationhousing.org, and you can donate on our website. You can connect with us either following us on social media or connecting through info@restorationhousing.org. And you can sign up for our newsletter that way as well. So we send a monthly newsletter with information about what we're doing. And that newsletter also usually kind of gets distilled down into social media posts. So if you'd rather not get email, but you want to stay connected, you can just follow us on social media.
Oh, very good. Well,
we have a fundraiser locally too, but probably not that many locals listening.
Maybe after you put it out on your social media.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that we'll make sure that all of those ways to contact you and to support you are listed on our webpage where the podcast is hosted. So if somebody's listening and didn't get a chance to write them down, they can go there and find links to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
So very good.
Oh, and YouTube. Sorry, I should have mentioned.
Oh, YouTube. Sure. I'll write that down.
Ever since COVID, we've gotten really good at, some homespun videos, and then some actual real videographers helped us as well. So we've got quite a bit of.
Yeah, I saw when I was doing research for the podcast, I did see you had like a walkthrough of a house, a video. Yeah. And I thought that was
we love
fun.
to do those. Yeah. We call them our hard hat tours. Mm-hmm. We've got these little series called Architectural Minutes that get into like the history and of the buildings and the neighborhoods. And then we have our campaign, a virtual campaign that goes with our luncheon that's sort of for our fundraising that will also be on our YouTube channel.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.